You're exhausted from pretending to be someone you're not, just to fit into a world that feels fundamentally fake. Every day you put on the mask, play the game, while inside you're screaming that none of this makes any goddamn sense. I am Charles Bukowski, and I spent my life refusing to pretend, choosing beautiful madness over acceptable sanity. What I discovered about embracing your authentic darkness will transform how you navigate this absurd world. Sometimes the most honest response to life's madness is to stop fighting it and find the beauty in the chaos. The same raw honesty that got me banned from polite society can free you from other people's expectations. But first, like this video, subscribe for more unfiltered wisdom, and comment where you're watching from. I want to know which corner of the world is ready to embrace its beautiful madness. Artifact: my father's belt, the leather strap that taught me early that the world doesn't give a shit about your feelings. And sometimes, the people who are supposed to love you are the ones who hurt you most. Let me tell you how I became the man you're listening to tonight. I wasn't born with some grand philosophy about beautiful madness. I was beaten into it, one brutal lesson at a time. My old man, Henry Bukowski Sr., was a German immigrant who brought all the old country's rage with him to America. He had fists like hammers and a temper that could crack mirrors. Every day after school, I'd walk up those front steps knowing there was a 50-50 chance I'd catch hell for something, maybe my grades, maybe the way I looked at him, maybe just because he'd had a bad day and needed someone smaller to take it out on. That belt hanging in the closet wasn't just leather. It was my introduction to the fundamental truth about existence. Life hurts, and nobody's coming to save you. But here's what that bastard never understood. Every beating he gave me was a lesson in authenticity. When you're getting your ass kicked for no good reason, you learn real quick that trying to please people is a sucker's game. You can be the perfect son, get straight A's, shine his shoes, and still catch a beating because he had a fight with my mother or lost money at the track. So I stopped trying to be what he wanted. I stopped trying to be what anyone wanted. The kids at school called me weird. The teachers said I was troubled. The neighbors whispered that I was headed for no good. And you know what? They were right. I was troubled by the fact that everyone was walking around pretending this whole setup made sense. My mother would patch me up after the old man's explosions, whispering apologies that weren't hers to make. She'd dab iodine on the cuts and tell me to be good, to try harder, to not provoke him. But I was learning something she couldn't teach me. Sometimes the only honest response to an insane situation is to embrace your own insanity. By the time I was 15, I'd figured out that the world was full of people like my father, angry, disappointed, looking for someone weaker to blame for their own failures. The difference was, most people spent their lives trying to avoid becoming targets. I decided to paint a bullseye on my chest and see what happened. That's when the beautiful madness really started. Instead of hiding from the world's cruelty, I walked straight into it. Instead of pretending everything was fine, I started writing about how fucked up everything really was. Instead of trying to fit in, I made being an outsider my full-time job. The belt taught me that pain is inevitable, but suffering through it quietly while pretending it doesn't hurt, that's optional. You can scream, you can fight back, you can turn your wounds into words that make other people uncomfortable. You can refuse to smile when you're bleeding inside. That's the first lesson in beautiful madness. Authenticity isn't pretty, it isn't polite, and it sure as hell isn't popular. But it's the only thing that's real in a world full of lies. Artifact: my time clock card punched thousands of times in that bureaucratic hell. Each stamp marking another day, I sold my soul for a paycheck and learned what it means to die while you're still breathing for 12 years. I worked for the United States Postal Service, and let me tell you something. If you want to understand the true horror of modern civilization, spend a decade sorting mail in a government building. Every morning at 6 a.m., I'd walk into that fluorescent-lit tomb and punch that time clock. The sound it made, that mechanical thunk, was the sound of another piece of my life being fed into the machine. 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, I'd stand at those sorting cases, my hands moving automatically while my mind screamed for escape. The supervisors were the worst kind of people, petty tyrants who'd found their tiny kingdom in the mailroom and ruled it with all the authority their small souls could muster. They'd time your bathroom breaks, write you up for talking, dock your pay for being 2 minutes late. These were people who'd never created anything, never risked anything, never felt anything deeper than the satisfaction of making someone else's day a little more miserable. But the real horror wasn't the supervisors, was watching what the job did to the other workers. Good men, decent men, men who'd started with dreams and ambitions, slowly getting ground down into nothing. They'd talk about retirement like it was salvation, counting the years until they could escape, never realizing they were already dead inside. I watched guys go grey sorting letters they'd never read, delivering messages they'd never understand, connecting people they'd never meet. The irony was perfect. We were the communication system for America, and we were the loneliest bastards in the country. The drinking started as a way to wash the taste of the day out of my mouth. After 8 hours of mechanized hell, I'd hit the bars and try to remember what it felt like to be human. The alcohol didn't solve anything, but it sure as hell made the problem more interesting. That's where I learned my second lesson in beautiful madness. Most people are living in quiet desperation, but they've convinced themselves it's noble. They call it responsibility, stability, being a provider. What it really is slow suicide with benefits. I started writing seriously during those post office years, not because I had some romantic notion about being a writer, but because if I didn't get the poison out of my system somehow, I was going to end up like the other guys, marking time until death. My poems and stories from that period were angry, bitter, full of contempt for the system that was eating us all alive. The little literary magazines that published them thought I was being dramatic, exaggerating for effect. They didn't understand I was being a reporter, documenting the daily murder of the human spirit. The beautiful madness was recognizing that this wasn't life, this was just existing. Real life was what happened after 5 p.m. in the bars, in the bed with a woman who understood that tomorrow was just another day in hell, in the typewriter, clicking away at 2 a.m. while the rest of the world slept their dreamless sleep. When I finally quit that job, my supervisor asked me what I was going to do. I told him I was going to live. He looked at me like I was crazy. He was right. Artifact, a losing ticket from Hollywood Park, crumpled in my pocket for weeks after a $200 loss. This piece of paper taught me that hope is the most dangerous drug of all. And sometimes losing everything is the only way to find out who you really are. The racetrack was my church, my therapy, and my university, all rolled into one magnificent temple of beautiful madness. While other men worshipped conventional gods, I worshipped the thunder of hooves and the poetry of long shots coming in at 32-1 odds. Santa Anita, Hollywood Park, Del Mar, these weren't just racetracks to me. They were classrooms where life taught its most honest lessons. At the track, there's no bullshit, no pretending, no social niceties. A horse either wins or it doesn't. Your money's either there or it's gone. You're either smart or you're broke, and most of the time, you're broke anyway. I'd sit in the grandstand, with my racing form, studying bloodlines and past performances like a scholar examining ancient texts. But I wasn't just betting on horses. I was betting on the fundamental chaos of existence. Every race was a metaphor for life itself. You can do all the research, make all the right calculations, pick the obvious winner, and still watch your money disappear when the 22-1 shot comes flying down the stretch. The regulars at the track were my kind of People degenerates, dreamers, men who'd given up on the safe bet of ordinary life and decided to live on the edge where things got interesting. We were united in our beautiful madness, our refusal to accept that slow, steady progress was the only way to live. There was this one guy, Eddie, who'd been coming to Santa Anita for 20 years. He'd lost his house, his wife, his job, everything that society said mattered. But every day at post time, he was the happiest man in California. He understood something that the suburban slaves would never get. It's better to lose everything doing what you love than to win everything doing what you hate. The horses taught me about authenticity in ways no philosophy book ever could. A thoroughbred doesn't run fast because it's trying to impress anyone. It runs fast because that's what it was born to do. When Secretariat ran that Belmont Stakes, stretching his lead to 30 lengths, he wasn't showing off. He was just being himself. And himself happened to be magnificent. That's what I learned from all those losing tickets. The beautiful madness isn't about winning or losing. It's about being true to your nature even when your nature is working against you. I was born to write, to drink, to chase long shots and beautiful women. Society said those were character flaws. The racetrack taught me they were just the odds I'd been given to work with. Every losing day at the track was a reminder that life doesn't owe you anything, that you can make all the right moves and still get beat by circumstances beyond your control. But every winning day, those rare, shining moments when everything clicked, proved that magic was still possible, that the universe sometimes rewarded the faithful fools who refused to play it safe. The track taught me to embrace uncertainty, to find beauty in the risk, to understand that the gamble itself was more honest than the guaranteed mediocrity everyone else was settling for. Artifact, an empty bottle of cutty sark. This amber glass container held more truth than any philosophy textbook, teaching me that sometimes you have to poison yourself to see clearly in a poisoned world. Let me tell you about drinking not. The romantic bullshit writers like to peddle about drowning sorrows and liquid inspiration. But the real thing, the beautiful madness of deliberately destroying yourself in a world that's trying to destroy you anyway. I started drinking seriously when I was 25, and for the next 30 years, alcohol was my most honest companion. While everyone else was lying to themselves about how great their lives were, I was sitting in dive bars at 2 in the afternoon, surrounded by other truth-tellers, unemployed actors, failed salesmen, women who'd given up on finding Prince Charming, and settled for whoever would buy the next round. The bottle taught me things that sobriety never could. When you're drunk, really drunk, the masks come off. Yours and everyone else's. The businessman crying into his whiskey about how much he hates his job. The housewife sneaking shots of vodka in her coffee. The college kid who's just figured out that his degree is worthless alcohol, strips away the pretense and shows you what people really are underneath all that social conditioning. But here's what the temperance crowd never understood. I wasn't drinking to escape. Reality was drinking to see it more clearly. Sober people live in a world of pleasant lies, convenient fictions that make getting through the day bearable. Drunk people live in a world where the truth is so obvious it hurts. The bars I haunted weren't social clubs. They were refuges for people who couldn't stomach the charade anymore. We'd sit there, night after night, telling each other stories that would make your therapist reach for his prescription pad. Stories about fathers who never said they loved us. Jobs that were killing us slowly. Marriages that died years before the divorce papers. Dreams that got buried under mortgages and car payments and the 1,000 tiny compromises that turn rebels into citizens. I wrote some of my best work drunk, not because alcohol made me more creative, but because it made me more honest. When you're 3 sheets to the wind, you stop worrying about what people will think. Stop censoring yourself. Stop trying to be literary or profound or any of the other things that kill real writing. You just tell the truth. And the truth is usually ugly and beautiful and heartbreaking all at the same time. The hangovers were part of the education. Every morning I'd wake up feeling like death, and that physical pain was a reminder of something important. If you're going to live authentically, you're going to pay for it. The straight world extracts its price through boredom and spiritual death. The drunk world extracts its price through liver damage and broken relationships. At least with drinking, you know what you're trading away. People always asked me why I didn't get help, why I didn't go to meetings, why I didn't try to get clean. They didn't understand I wasn't sick. I was awake. The rest of the world was sleepwalking through their lives, addicted to comfort and security and the illusion that everything was going to work out fine. My addiction was to truth, and truth is a lot harder to kick than booze. The bottle taught me that sometimes the cure is worse than the disease, that there are different ways to be destroyed, and that choosing your own destruction is the last. Freedom left to people like us. It's not a philosophy I'd recommend to everyone, but it worked for me. It kept me honest when honesty was all I had left. Artifact, a torn photograph, half of a picture from a long-forgotten night, the other half burned in anger by a woman whose name I can barely remember, but whose fury taught me that love and hate are often the same emotion, wearing different masks. Women were my greatest teachers in the University of Beautiful Madness, not because they were angels or muses or any of that romantic horseshit, but because they were just as fucked up as I was, just as desperate, just as willing to destroy themselves for something that felt real. I never had what you'd call normal relationships. Normal relationships are built on compromise, mutual respect, shared goals, all the things that make life bearable but rob it of its fire. My relationships were built on mutual recognition of damage, an understanding that we were both too far gone for conventional happiness, but maybe, just maybe, we could find something better in the wreckage. There was Jane, my first real love, if you can call what we had love. She was a drunk like me, mean like me, honest like me. We'd fight like animals and fuck like the world was ending, which, in our particular corner of it, it was. She taught me that tenderness and cruelty aren't opposites, they're dance partners, spinning each other around the floor until you can't tell which is which. Jane would disappear for days, sometimes weeks, and I'd find her in some Fleabag hotel, with another man, or in the drunk tank, or just wandering the streets like a ghost who'd forgotten she was dead. When she came back, we wouldn't talk about where she'd been. We'd just pick up where we left off. Like drowning people who'd found each other in the middle of the ocean. The beautiful madness in our relationship wasn't the drama. Every couple has drama. It was the honesty. We never pretended we were good for each other, never talked about futures or forever, or any of the lies people tell themselves when they're trying to make something permanent out of something that's designed to burn out. Then there was Linda, who tried to save me. Linda believed that underneath all the drinking and the anger and the contempt for everything decent, there was a good man waiting to be rescued. She'd pour my whiskey down the sink, hide my car keys, make me elaborate healthy meals that I'd ignore in favor of another drink. Linda taught me something crucial about the beautiful madness. You can't save someone who doesn't want to be saved, and you can't love someone into being different than they are. I wasn't broken, I was complete, just not in a way that fit into her picture of what a man should be. The fights with Linda were different than the fights with Jane. With Jane, we fought because we were both drowning and kept pulling each other under. With Linda, we fought because she was trying to drag me to shore, and I was trying to explain that I'd learned to breathe underwater. But the women who understood me best were the ones who never tried to change me, the waitresses and barmaids, and fellow degenerates who recognized a kindred spirit when they saw one. These women didn't want to be saved either, they wanted to be seen. to be accepted for who they actually were instead of who they were supposed to be. There's something beautiful about two damaged people finding each other in the dark and deciding not to fix each other, just to keep each other company while the world burns down around them. It's not healthy, it's not sustainable, it's not the kind of love they write songs about, but it's honest, and honesty is the rarest thing you can find between two people. The torn photograph represents something important. Most relationships end badly. Most love turns to resentment. Most promises get broken. But for a moment, maybe just one night, maybe a few months, two people can see each other clearly, without judgment, without expectations, just as they are. That's worth more than a lifetime of polite marriages and comfortable compromises. That's the beautiful madness of authentic connection. Artifact, my old royal typewriter, the keys worn smooth by millions of words. This machine was my confessional, my weapon and my salvation all at once. Every story, every poem, every late-night rant was hammered out on these keys like bullets, fired at a world that didn't want to hear the truth. Writing saved my life, but not in the way you might think. It didn't make me rich, it didn't make me famous, and it sure as hell didn't make me respectable. What it did was give me a place to put all the poison, all the anger, all the beautiful madness that was eating me alive from the inside. I started writing because I had to, not because I had some romantic notion about being an artist, but because if I didn't get the words out, they were going to kill me. Every day I didn't write was a day I came closer to ending up like the other casualties of modern life, the guys who ate their guns in quiet suburban bedrooms, the women who drove their cars into bridge abutments, the lost souls who just stopped getting out of bed one morning and never got up again. The little magazines that published my early work, they thought they were being brave, printing stories about drunks and losers and people who lived in the margins. They didn't understand that I wasn't writing fiction. I was writing reports from the front lines of a war most people didn't even know was being fought. My characters weren't characters, they were people I knew, people I'd been, people I drank with and slept with and watched destroy themselves in slow motion. The stories weren't stories, they were documentaries, evidence that there was a whole world of human experience that polite society pretended didn't exist. The beautiful madness of writing is that it's the one place where total honesty is not just allowed, it's required. You can lie to your boss, lie to your wife, lie to your priest, but you can't lie on the page. The words know when you're bullshitting, and they'll turn on you faster than a mean drunk with a broken bottle. I wrote about what I knew: poverty, loneliness, the daily humiliation of trying to maintain your dignity in a world designed to strip it away. I wrote about the post office, about the racetrack, about sitting in bars at closing time with people who'd given up on everything except the next drink. I wrote about women who hurt you and jobs that killed you and the slow realization that nobody was coming to save you. The literary establishment hated my work at first. They said it was crude, unpolished, lacking in the refinement that separated literature from mere writing. They wanted metaphors and symbolism and hidden meanings. I gave them blood and shit and the unvarnished truth about what it means to be human when all the pretenses are stripped away. But something strange happened. People started reading my work, really reading it, not just studying it. They recognized themselves in my characters, saw their own secret desperation reflected in my stories. They understood that I wasn't trying to elevate literature, I was trying to drag it down to street level where life actually happens. The typewriter became my best friend and my worst enemy. It demanded everything I had, every emotion, every memory, every moment of clarity I could steal from the chaos of living. In return, it gave me the only thing that mattered, a way to make sense of the senseless, to find meaning in the meaningless, to turn my beautiful madness into something that might help other people understand their own. Artifact, a dog-eared copy of Ask the Dust, John Fante's masterpiece that showed me it was possible to write about losers and make them beautiful. That failure could be art if you were honest enough about it. Los Angeles was the perfect city for a man like me, a place where dreams came to die publicly, where the beautiful madness of ambition crashed against the rocks of reality every single day. This wasn't New York, where failure could hide in the anonymity of crowds. This was the city of perpetual sunshine and visible disappointment, where broken people drove convertibles and waited tables while waiting for their big break. I loved LA because it was honest about its dishonesty. The whole city was built on the premise that if you just tried hard enough, believed hard enough, wanted it bad enough, you could transform yourself into whoever you wanted to be. It was the most seductive lie ever told, and I got to watch thousands of people destroy themselves believing it. The aspiring actors were the most beautiful casualties. They'd come from Ohio or Texas or wherever dreams were still possible, armed with headshots and hope and a naive faith in their own specialness. Within 6 months, they'd be bitter and broke, serving coffee to other bitter broke dreamers, talking about the role they almost got, the agent who almost signed them, the break that was just around the corner. I'd sit in coffee shops on Hollywood Boulevard and watch them audition for each other, practicing their fake smiles and manufactured charm, turning themselves into products to be sold to people who saw them as nothing more than meat. The beautiful madness wasn't in their ambition, it was in their refusal to admit that the game was rigged, that the system was designed to chew them up and spit them out. But Los Angeles taught me something important about authentic living. You can either fight the city or let it teach you. The people who survived, LA really survived, not just endured, were the ones who learned to find beauty in the brutality, meaning in the meaninglessness. There was wisdom in the failure I saw everywhere. The screenwriter who'd been working on the same script for 10 years, the singer who played empty clubs to audiences of 3, the comedian whose jokes died harder than his dreams. They were all living proof that pursuing your passion doesn't guarantee success, but it guarantees something better. The knowledge that you tried. The city was full of beautiful madmen who'd chosen long shots over sure things, who'd rather fail at something they loved than succeed at something they hated. They were my people, fellow refugees from the world of sensible choices and practical decisions. Fante's book showed me how to write about these people with compassion, instead of contempt. He understood that there's nobility in failure when it's honest failure, when it comes from reaching for something beyond your grasp rather than accepting what's offered. His characters were losers, but they were magnificent losers, beautiful in their refusal to settle for safety. LA was a factory that turned hope into heartbreak, but it was also a place where heartbreak could be transformed into art. The city broke everyone eventually, but some people learned to make music from the sound of their own breaking. That's the beautiful madness of any dream. City promises you everything and delivers nothing, but in the process of destroying you, it teaches you who you really are. Artifact, a mimeographed literary magazine. Wormwood Review, one of the small press publications that published my early work when the mainstream wouldn't touch it, proving that real art lives in the margins, not in the museums. For years, I was invisible to the literary establishment, while the university poets were getting grants and teaching positions and polite reviews in respectable magazines. I was publishing in mimeographed journals with names like Wormwood Review and Open City, magazines that sold maybe 100 copies to other outcasts and malcontents. The beautiful madness of the underground literary scene was that nobody was doing it for money or fame or career advancement. We were doing it because we had to, because the words were burning holes in our guts, and the only relief was to get them down on paper and share them with other people who understood what it meant to be outside looking in. The editors of these little magazines were saints and madmen, people who spent their own money to print work that nobody wanted to read, who devoted their lives to preserving voices that the mainstream wanted to silence. They worked day jobs to fund their obsessions, stayed up all night laying out pages, carried boxes of magazines to readings where maybe 5 people would show up. Marvin Malone, at Wormwood Review, published more of my early work than anyone else. He never paid me much, sometimes $5, sometimes a bottle of wine, but he gave me something more valuable, proof that my voice mattered, that there was an audience for the kind of truth I was trying to tell. The underground scene was like a parallel universe where different rules applied. Success wasn't measured by sales or reviews or academic recognition. It was measured by authenticity, by how honestly you could write about the parts of life that polite society pretended didn't exist. We were all casualties of one kind or another. Vietnam vets who couldn't adjust to civilian life, the factory workers who wrote poetry on their lunch breaks, the women who refused to be quiet about their anger and disappointment. The underground was where we went to lick our wounds and turn our scars into art. The readings were held in bookstores and coffee houses and sometimes people's living rooms. There was no separation between performer and audience. We were all in it together, united by our refusal to accept the sanitized version of human experience that passed for culture in America. I learned more about writing from those underground years than I ever would have in any university workshop. I learned that real writing comes from necessity, not inspiration. I learned that your audience finds you if you're telling the truth, even if that audience is small. I learned that being ignored by the establishment isn't failure, it's freedom. The mimeograph machine was our printing press, cranking out copies that smeared and smudged but carried more truth than anything coming out of New York publishing houses. We were creating an alternative culture, one story and one poem at a time. The beautiful madness was believing that what we were doing mattered, that somewhere out there people needed to hear our voices, needed to know they weren't alone in their alienation and anger and desperate hope for something better. Artifact, a fan letter from Germany, written in broken English by someone who'd never been to America, but understood my work better than most American critics, proving that authentic pain translates across all languages and borders. Success, when it finally came, was the strangest kind of beautiful madness I'd ever experienced. After years of being ignored, rejected, dismissed as crude and unworthy of serious attention, suddenly everyone wanted a piece of Charles Bukowski. The same editors who'd returned my manuscripts with form rejection letters were now calling my agent, begging for new work. But here's the thing about success. Doesn't change who you are. It just reveals it more clearly. I was still the same angry drunk who'd been writing about the underbelly of American life. But now that angry drunk was fashionable, college students were reading my books, professors were teaching my poems, critics were writing dissertations about the very work they'd ignored for decades. The fan mail was the weirdest part. Letters would arrive from all over the world: Japan, Germany, France, places I'd never been and probably never would visit. These strangers were writing to tell me that my work had saved their lives, that reading about my beautiful madness had given them permission to embrace their own. Some of the letters broke my heart. Young people who felt as alienated and hopeless as I had at their age, finding comfort in the fact that someone else had walked through the same darkness and lived to write about it. They saw in my characters the drunks and losers and desperate souls, reflections of their own secret selves. But success brought its own problems. Suddenly, I was expected to be Charles Bukowski all the time, to perform the role of the hard-drinking, woman-chasing, horse-playing rebel that people had constructed from my work. They wanted me to be the character I'd created, not the man who'd created the character. The literary establishment that had ignored me for so long now wanted to claim me, to domesticate me, to turn me into a respectable figure they could point to as evidence of their open-mindedness. They'd invite me to universities to read my work about how much I hated universities, ask me to explain the meaning of poems that were meant to be felt, not analyzed. Young writers would seek me out, looking for the secret formula, the magic trick, that would transform their comfortable middle-class angst into the kind of raw material I'd mined from my years in the gutter. They didn't understand that you can't fake authenticity, that the power in my work came from the fact that I'd actually lived it, not just imagined it. The beautiful madness of fame was learning that it didn't change anything essential about the human condition. Rich or poor, famous or unknown, we all face the same fundamental questions. How do we find meaning in a meaningless world? How do we love without being destroyed by love? How do we maintain our dignity when life seems designed to strip it away? Success gave me financial security, but it couldn't give me what I'd always been looking for, the feeling that I belonged somewhere, that I was understood, that my life had some purpose beyond just surviving it. Those things had to come from inside, from the daily practice of being honest about who I was and what I'd experienced. The fan letter from Germany reminded me why I'd started writing in the first place. Not to become famous, but to connect with other people who felt as lost and confused and angry as I did. As long as the work was doing that, serving that purpose, the rest was just noise. Artifact, a rejection letter from the New Yorker, politely declining my work with the suggestion that I refine my voice. This letter became my reminder that sometimes the highest compliment the establishment can give you is their disapproval. The most liberating philosophy I ever developed was simple. Stop giving a damn about what other people think. Not in the rebellious teenager way, where you're trying to shock your parents, but in the deeper way, the recognition that most people's opinions are worthless, because most people are sleepwalking through their lives. That rejection letter from the New Yorker was a gift, though I didn't realize it at the time. They wanted me to refine my voice, which was their polite way of saying they wanted me to write like everyone else. They published, bloodless, academic, safe. They wanted me to sand down all the rough edges that made my work distinctive, to turn my beautiful madness into acceptable mediocrity. The beautiful madness of not giving a damn is that it frees you to be exactly who you are, without apology or explanation. Most people spend their entire lives trying to please someone: their parents, their boss, their spouse, their neighbors, complete strangers whose approval means nothing and whose disapproval means even less. I stopped caring about respectability when I realized that respectability was just another word for spiritual death. The respectable people I knew were miserable, trapped in jobs they hated, marriages that had died years ago, lives that felt like slow-motion suicide. They'd traded their authenticity for security, their passion for approval, their souls for a pension plan. The philosophy of not giving a damn doesn't mean you become cruel or heartless. It means you stop letting other people's fears and limitations define your choices. It means you write the truth even when the truth makes people uncomfortable. It means you love who you want to love, drink what you want to drink, live how you want to live, and let the consequences fall where they may. People mistake this for nihilism, but it's actually the opposite. When you stop caring about meaningless things, social status, conventional success, what the neighbors think, become free to care about the things that actually matter: your art, your relationships, your own authentic experience of being alive. The hardest part isn't developing this philosophy, it's maintaining it when the pressure to conform gets intense. Society has 1,000 ways of punishing people who refuse to play by the rules. They'll call you selfish, irresponsible, immature. They'll exclude you from opportunities, relationships, communities. The price of authenticity is often loneliness. But here's what I learned: it's better to be alone and honest than to be surrounded by people and living a lie. It's better to be rejected for who you really are than accepted for who you're pretending to be. It's better to fail at something you believe in than succeed at something that means nothing to you. The beautiful madness is recognizing that approval from people you don't respect is worthless, that criticism from people who've never risked anything is meaningless, that the only opinion that matters is your own, and only when it's based on honest self-examination, not self-deception. Not giving a damn is the foundation of all authentic living. Everything else, love, art, friendship, meaning, becomes possible only when you stop trying to earn permission to be yourself. Artifact, a hospital bracelet from one of my many trips to the emergency room. This plastic band reminded me that death was always waiting in the wings, and that awareness of mortality is what gives life its edge. Death and I were old friends. Long before I actually died, we'd been dancing together since I was a kid, when my father's beatings made me wonder if it might be easier to just stop existing. We waltzed through my drinking years, when every blackout was a rehearsal for the final curtain. We tangoed through my time at the post office, where I died a little bit every day until I wasn't sure there was anything left to kill. The beautiful madness of living with death as your constant companion is that it strips away all the bullshit. When you really understand that you're going to die, not someday, not eventually, but soon. Maybe today it becomes impossible to waste time on things that don't matter. Most people live as if they're immortal. They put off their dreams, postpone their happiness, save their authentic selves for someday when conditions will be perfect. They're waiting for permission to live, and that permission never comes because they're the only ones who can give it to themselves. I learned to use death as a filter for decision. Before I did anything, I'd ask myself, if I knew I was going to die next week, would this matter? Would I spend my last days worrying about what my neighbors thought of my lawn? Would I waste my final hours in a job that made me miserable? Would I save my I love you for a better moment? The answer was always no. Death taught me to live urgently, to say what I meant when I meant it, to pursue what I wanted without apology or delay. It taught me that most of our social conventions are just ways of avoiding the fundamental terror of existence, the knowledge that we're all just temporary arrangements of atoms, spinning through space on a rock that's going to be incinerated by the sun eventually anyway. But death wasn't just a teacher, it was also a comfort. On the worst days, when the pain of living seemed unbearable, I could always remind myself that this too would pass, that suffering has an expiration date, that even the worst life is still a temporary condition. The hospital bracelet represents something important. The medical system's attempt to keep me alive long enough to keep suffering. They'd pump my stomach, give me 4 fluids, lecture me about my lifestyle choices, then send me back out into the same world that had driven me to drink in the first place. They could treat the symptoms, but they couldn't cure the disease of being human in an inhuman world. Death made me a better writer because it gave me perspective. Everything I wrote was written by a dying man for other dying people. That shared mortality created an intimacy, an urgency, a recognition that we were all in this mess together. For a very short time, the beautiful madness is learning to live fully, precisely because life is finite. Death isn't the enemy, deadline that makes everything else meaningful. Without death, there would be no reason to hurry, no reason to risk, no reason to love with the desperate intensity that makes life worth living. Death taught me that the only real tragedy isn't dying, it's dying without ever having lived. Artifact, a mirror with a crack down the middle, broken during one of my rages. This fractured reflection showed me that sometimes the most honest way to see yourself is through the damage you've done. The hardest person to survive in this life isn't your enemies, your critics, or even the system that's trying to grind you down. It's yourself. Your own self-destructive impulses, your capacity for sabotage, your talent for turning victory into defeat, and hope into disappointment. I was my own worst enemy for most of my life. Just when things would start going well, a good woman, a decent apartment, some recognition for my writing, I'd find a way to fuck it up. I'd drink too much, say the wrong thing, pick a fight I couldn't win, burn bridges I'd need later. It was like I was programmed for self-destruction. Like success was more terrifying than failure. The cracked mirror taught me something about self-knowledge. Sometimes you need to see yourself through the damage to understand who you really are. The uncracked parts showed me the man I pretended to be, the writer, the rebel, the guy who didn't give a damn. But the crack revealed the truth, the scared kid who'd never learned to believe he deserved good things, who destroyed what he loved before it could abandon him. I broke that mirror during a fight with a woman whose name I can't even remember now. She'd said something about my drinking, something reasonable and caring, and instead of listening, I threw my glass at the wall behind her. It missed her, thank God. It missed her, but it shattered the mirror, and for weeks afterward I had to look at my fractured face every morning while I shaved. That broken reflection became a daily reminder of my capacity for destruction. Not just the destruction of objects, mirrors, glasses, relationships, but the destruction of possibility. Every time I sabotaged something good in my life, I was really sabotaging the possibility of becoming someone better than I was. Surviving yourself means learning to recognize your patterns, the ways you sabotage your own happiness. For me, it was always the same cycle. Achieve something, panic about losing it, do something stupid to ensure I'd lose it, then feel relieved and angry at the same time. The relief came from being back in familiar territory, the bottom, where I knew how to function. The anger came from knowing I'd done it to myself again. The beautiful madness of self-sabotage is that it's often more comfortable than success. Failure is predictable, manageable, something you can plan for. Success is scary because it changes everything, forces you to become someone you've never been before, someone who might not know how to handle good fortune. I remember getting my first decent royalty check from a publisher. Instead of being happy, I was terrified. What if this was it? What if I could never write anything this good again? What if people expected me to be successful from now on? So I went on a 3-day bender, spent most of the money, and nearly got myself arrested for public intoxication. It was easier to be a drunk with a little money than a successful writer with responsibilities. But learning to survive yourself isn't about changing your nature. It's about working with it instead of against it. I never stopped being self-destructive completely, but I learned to channel that destruction into my writing instead of my life. Instead of destroying relationships, I destroyed characters on the page. Instead of burning down my career, I burned down the pretenses that were keeping my work from being honest. The trick is recognizing that your flaws aren't bugs in your programming, they're features. The same obsessive nature that makes you drink too much can make you write great poetry. The same anger that destroys relationships can fuel art that connects with other angry people. The same tendency toward isolation that makes you difficult to live with can give you the solitude necessary for real creative work. I learned to negotiate with my demons instead of trying to exercise them. When the urge to sabotage would hit, I'd try to redirect it. Instead of picking a fight with someone I cared about, I'd write a story about someone picking a fight. Instead of drinking until I blacked out, I'd drink just enough to access the emotions I needed for my work, then switch to coffee. It didn't always work. There were plenty of times when the old patterns won, when I destroyed something good just because I could, just because that's what I'd always done. But gradually, over years, I learned to survive myself more often than I didn't. Surviving yourself means accepting that you're going to keep making the same mistakes. But maybe you can make them more consciously, more deliberately, in service of something bigger than your own destruction. You can't change the fundamental facts of your personality, but you can change what you do with them. The cracked mirror showed me that wholeness isn't about being perfect. It's about being complete, damage and all. The crack isn't something to be fixed, it's part of the design, part of what makes the reflection interesting, authentic, true. Eventually, I stopped trying to replace that mirror. I needed to see myself as I really was, broken, but still reflecting light. Artifact, a wedding ring, not mine, but Linda's, which she threw at me during our final fight. A small circle of gold that represented everything I was too damaged to give and too frightened to receive. Real love, the kind that changes you down to your bones, only happens between people who are brave enough to be completely honest about how fucked up they are. Everything else is just companionship, convenient partnership, mutual delusion dressed up in pretty words and social expectations. Linda Lee was the closest I ever came to understanding what love might look like for someone like me. She wasn't trying to save me, she'd given up on that impossible project years before we met. She wasn't trying to change me into someone respectable. She'd seen enough of respectable men to know they were just as broken as I was, only more dishonest about it. What Linda offered was something more dangerous than salvation: acceptance. She looked at the wreckage of my life, the drinking, the anger, the decades of bad choices, and somehow found something worth loving in the ruins. Not the potential for what I might become, but what I actually was in that moment. I met Linda when I was already well into my 50s, when most people would have written me off as a lost cause. She was younger, smarter, and had infinitely better judgment than I did. She should have run the moment she met me, but instead she stuck around to see what would happen. What happened was the most honest relationship I ever had with another human being. The beautiful madness of our relationship was that we both understood it probably wouldn't last. We were too old, too damaged, too set in our destructive patterns to sustain the kind of fairy tale romance that young people believe in. But that knowledge didn't make us love each other, lest it made us love more urgently, more completely. Like people who know the war is ending, and this might be their last night together. Linda had been married before, to decent men who treated her well and bored her to tears. She'd had relationships with artists and intellectuals who talked a good game about passion and authenticity, but were really just as conventional as everyone else when it came down to it. What she saw in me, I think, was someone who was genuinely committed to living without compromise, even when that commitment made life harder than it needed to be. We lived together for years before we got married, and even then it was more for practical reasons than romantic ones. I was getting older, my health was deteriorating, and Linda wanted to make sure she could make medical decisions for me when the time came. It wasn't exactly a traditional proposal, but it was honest, which was more than most marriages can claim. We fought like animals sometimes, old wounds reopening, ancient resentments spilling out like blood from a cut that never properly healed. But we also had moments of tenderness that caught us both by surprise, mornings when we'd wake up wrapped around each other like survivors of some disaster, afternoons when we'd sit in comfortable silence, just grateful to have found someone who understood the particular flavor of our loneliness. Love in the time of chaos isn't about finding someone who completes you, it's about finding someone whose incompleteness matches your own in interesting ways. Linda and I were both broken, but we were broken in complementary places. Where she was too trusting, I was too suspicious. Where I was too selfish, she was too giving. We didn't fix each other, but we balanced each other out, created something stable from our combined instability. The fights were terrible when they happened, not because we said things we didn't mean, but because we said things we meant too much. The truth, when it's used as a weapon, can cut deeper than any lie. Linda knew exactly how to hurt me, knew about the scared kid hiding inside the tough guy facade, knew about my terror of abandonment, my conviction that everyone who got close to me would eventually leave, The wedding ring she threw at me during our final fight represented everything I was afraid of about love. The promise of permanence in a world where nothing lasts. The demand for commitment from someone who'd never learned to commit to anything. The hope that two damaged people could create something whole. That last fight started over something stupid, money, probably, or my drinking, or some thoughtless thing I'd said. But it escalated quickly, the way fights do when both people are carrying years of accumulated resentment. She accused me of being selfish, which was true. I accused her of trying to change me, which was probably also true. We said things that couldn't be taken back, crossed lines that couldn't be uncrossed. When she threw the ring at me, it bounced off my chest and landed on the floor between us. For a moment, we both just stared at this small circle of gold that was supposed to represent everything we meant to each other. Lying on the dirty floor like a piece of junk, I picked up that ring after she left, held it in my palm like a small golden question mark. Should I go after her? Should I promise to change? Should I lie to both of us and pretend that love was enough to overcome a lifetime of self-destructive patterns? Instead, I put the ring in my desk drawer and wrote about what had just happened. Not to understand it, not to fix it, but to document it the way love comes and goes. The way it transforms you even when it doesn't save you. The way it leaves you different than it found you even when it leaves you alone. The beautiful madness of love is that it doesn't solve anything. It doesn't make you a better person or heal your childhood wounds or give your life meaning. What it does is show you, for however brief a time, that connection is possible, that someone can see you clearly and choose to stay, at least for a while. Linda eventually came back, and we eventually worked things out, more or less. But that moment with the ring taught me something important about love. It's not about promises or permanence or happily ever after. It's about choosing each other again and again, despite all the reasons not to. That's enough. Sometimes that has to be enough. Artifact, a bar napkin with poems scrawled on it, written during a 3-hour afternoon at a dive bar. This napkin held some of my best lines, proving that inspiration doesn't wait for convenient moments or proper writing conditions. Society will tell you that time is money, that every moment should be productive, that idle hours are wasted hours. Society is full of shit. Some of my best insights came during times when I was supposedly doing nothing, sitting in bars, staring out windows, lying in bed at 2 in the afternoon with a hangover and a head full of half-formed thoughts. The beautiful madness of wasted time is that it's not actually wasted. It's during these supposedly unproductive moments that your mind processes the chaos of living, sorts through the confusion, finds patterns in the madness. The conscious mind is too busy, too focused on immediate problems to see the bigger picture. It's the unconscious mind, the dreaming mind, the bored mind that makes the real connections. I wrote some of my best poems on bar napkins during long afternoons when I had nowhere to be and nothing to do except drink and think and watch the other customers live out their quiet desperation. The bartender would see me scribbling and shake his head, another drunk, thinking he's a writer. He didn't understand that the drinking and the writing weren't separate activities. They were both ways of diving deeper into the experience of being human. That particular napkin came from a place called the Redwood Room, a dive bar in East Hollywood that doesn't exist anymore. I'd been sitting there for hours, nursing beers and watching the regulars drift in and out like ghosts haunting their own lives. There was something about the light filtering through the dirty windows, the way it caught the dust motes floating in the stale air, that made me see something I'd never seen before. The poem I wrote on that napkin was about ordinary sadness, not the dramatic kind that gets written about in literature, but the quiet kind that most people carry around like a stone in their pocket. The sadness of work that doesn't matter, of relationships that have died but haven't been buried, of dreams that have been postponed. So long, they've turned into regrets. The pressure to be constantly productive is another form of spiritual death. It keeps you so busy doing things that you never have time to think about whether the things you're doing are worth doing. It turns life into one long to-do list, a series of tasks to be completed rather than moments to be experienced. I learned more about writing during my unemployed years than I ever learned during my working years. Not because I had more time to write, though I did, but because I had more time to live, to observe, to let experiences settle into my bones before I tried to turn them into words. People would ask me how I could afford to spend entire afternoons in bars, how I could justify the waste of time and money. They didn't understand that those afternoons were my research, my laboratory, my graduate school in human nature. You can't write honestly about people if you don't spend time with them, really watching them, seeing how they move through the world when they think nobody's paying attention. The napkin with the poem scrawled on it represents something important about the creative process. Inspiration doesn't make appointments. It shows up when it shows up, often in the most inconvenient places and circumstances. If you're always rushing from one obligation to the next, you'll miss it. If you're always focused on being productive, you'll never be available for the kind of deep, useless thinking that produces real art. I kept that napkin for years, stuck it in books, used it as a bookmark, carried it in my wallet. The ink faded, the paper got soft and torn, but the words remained. Eventually, I typed the poem up properly, submitted it to magazines, got it published, but the original, on that stained napkin, was somehow more true than the clean-typed version. Wasted time is where you figure out who you are when you're not performing for anyone else, when you're not trying to accomplish anything or impress anyone. It's in these moments of apparent laziness that you discover what you actually think about things, what you actually feel, what you actually care about. Underneath all the noise of daily survival, the wisdom of wasted time is that it's not about doing nothing, it's about being present for the nothingness, letting it teach you what it has to teach. Most people are so afraid of boredom, so terrified of being alone with their thoughts, that they fill every moment with distraction. They never discover what their own mind sounds like when it's not being directed by external demands. I think about all the poems that were never written because people were too busy being productive, all the insights that were never had because people couldn't sit still long enough to let them surface. The beautiful madness is learning to value the spaces between the actions, the silence between the words, the emptiness that makes fullness possible. The bar is gone now, torn down to make room for a parking lot. But somewhere in my files, I still have that napkin, a reminder that the most important work often happens when you're not trying to work at all. Artifact, a first edition of Post Office, my first published novel, dog-eared and coffee-stained from being read by countless strangers, who found pieces of themselves in my stories about working-class desperation. When I think about legacy, I don't think about literary awards or academic recognition or a place in the canon of American literature. I think about the letters I received from readers who said my work helped them feel less alone in the world, less crazy for refusing to accept the lies everyone else seemed to believe. The beautiful madness of authentic living is that it gives other people permission to be authentic too. When you refuse to pretend, when you write honestly about failure and disappointment and the daily struggle to maintain your dignity in an undignified world, you create space for other people to stop pretending to. That first edition of Post Office represents something larger than just a book. It represents the possibility that truth-telling matters, that someone's authentic experience of life can become art that speaks to strangers decades later. The coffee stains and dog-eared pages are evidence that the book was used, not just read, that people turned to it when they needed to remember. They weren't the only ones who felt like misfits in their own lives. I never set out to be inspirational. I was just trying to survive, and writing was how I processed the experience of surviving. But apparently there were a lot of other people trying to survive the same things: dead-end jobs, broken relationships, the crushing weight of ordinary disappointment. My particular brand of beautiful madness resonated with their particular brand of beautiful madness. The letters started coming shortly after Post Office was published. Not many at first, but enough to let me know that the book was finding its audience. A factory worker from Detroit who said, reading about Henry Chinaski's postal service hell made him realize he wasn't crazy for hating his assembly line job. A woman from Phoenix who thanked me for writing about the kind of men she'd known: losers, maybe, but honest losers who didn't pretend to be something they weren't. The real legacy isn't the books themselves, it's the example of living without apology, of refusing to sanitize your experience to make it more palatable to people who've never been where you've been. It's the demonstration that you can be deeply flawed and still create something valuable, that your worst qualities might also be your most interesting qualities, too. Many writers try to make themselves into heroes in their own stories. They clean up their motivations, edit out their worst impulses, present themselves as more noble and wise than they actually are. I tried to do the opposite, to show myself as honestly as possible, warts and all, without trying to justify or excuse or explain away my choices. One letter that stuck with me came from a college student who said my work had saved his life. He'd been planning to kill himself, had the pills ready and everything, but decided to read one more book first. It happened to be Women, and something about the way I wrote about surviving daily humiliation and disappointment made him realize that maybe life was worth sticking around for, even if it never got much better than it was. I don't know if I really saved that kid's life, but I know my work showed him that it was possible to keep going without hope, to find meaning in meaninglessness, to create beauty from ugliness. That's what authentic art does. It doesn't solve problems or provide answers, but it lets people know they're not alone in their confusion and pain. The beautiful madness is trusting that honesty is more valuable than likability, that readers would rather connect with someone real than admire someone perfect. People don't need more heroes, they need more honest witnesses to the experience of being human in all its messy complexity. What I hope my work demonstrates is that there's no right way to live a life, no formula for happiness or success or meaning. There are only choices, and the consequences of choices, and the ongoing challenge of staying true to yourself. When the world is constantly trying to convince you to be someone else, the legacy of authentic living isn't about being remembered, it's about giving people tools they can use while they're alive. Not tools for fixing their problems or achieving their goals, but tools for accepting their problems and finding meaning in the struggle itself. My books are full of people who don't get happy endings, who don't learn important lessons, who don't grow or change in satisfying ways. They just keep going, keep trying to figure it out, keep looking for moments of beauty and connection in the middle of the chaos. That worn copy of Post Office represents something important, the idea that a book isn't finished when it's published, finished when it stops finding new readers who need it. Every coffee stain, every dog-eared page, every marginalia scribbled by some unknown reader is evidence that the work is still alive, still doing whatever work it was meant to do. That's the real legacy, the permission to keep going without knowing where you're going, to keep trying without guarantees of success, to keep being yourself even when yourself is difficult and disappointing and imperfect. Sometimes that's enough. Sometimes that has to be enough. Artifact, a letter never sent, written to a young writer who'd asked for advice. This unsent response contained everything I wished someone had told me when I was starting out. Too honest, too male, but too true to throw away. If you're listening to this, If you've made it this far through my rambling philosophy of beautiful madness, then you're probably one of us the misfits, the outsiders, the people who can't quite figure out how to fit into a world that seems designed for someone else. Let me tell you a few things I wish someone had told me when I was young and stupid and thought I knew what I was doing. First, don't try to be a writer. If you can do anything else, anything at all, do that instead. Writing is not a career choice, a compulsion, a sickness, an addiction to putting your guts on paper and hoping someone will understand. If you can be happy selling insurance or teaching school or fixing cars, for God's sake, do that. You'll sleep better, make more money, and your family won't worry about your mental health. But if you can't do anything else, if the words are eating you alive from the inside, and the only relief is to get them out, then write. Write badly, write honestly, write like your life depends on it, because it does. Don't worry about being good. Good is subjective, temporary, meaningless. Worry about being real. The young writer who prompted that unsent letter was earnest, eager, full of the kind of hope that both inspired and terrified me. He'd read my work and somehow concluded that I had answers, that I'd figured out some secret formula for turning pain into art. He wanted to know about my process, my influences, my advice for breaking into the literary world. What he really wanted, I think, was permission to be himself on the page. He was writing careful, polite stories about nice people doing reasonable things and wondering why they felt dead on arrival. He'd been trained by workshops and teachers to sand off all the rough edges, to make his work acceptable to the broadest possible audience. Second, nobody owes you anything. Not readers, not editors, not the universe. Your pain doesn't entitle you to success. Your talent doesn't guarantee recognition. Your authenticity doesn't promise an audience. Write because you have to, not because you expect anything in return. This is the hardest lesson for young writers to learn. They've been told all their lives that if they work hard and follow the rules, they'll be rewarded. But art doesn't work that way. Art is chaos, pretending to be order, madness, pretending to be wisdom. The marketplace doesn't care about your artistic vision, it cares about what sells. I spent years being bitter about this, angry at editors who rejected my work, resentful of writers who got published while I didn't. It was wasted energy. The world doesn't owe you a career in writing any more than it owes you happiness or love or meaning. These things, if they come at all, come as gifts, not entitlements. Third, most of the advice you'll get is wrong. People will tell you to follow your dreams, believe in yourself, never give up. That's all bullshit designed to make them feel better about giving you advice. The truth is messier. Sometimes you should give up. Sometimes your dreams are stupid. Sometimes believing in yourself is just another form of self-delusion. The writing world is full of people dispensing wisdom they've never earned, rules they've never tested, encouragement they don't really mean. They'll tell you to find your voice, as if your voice is something you can discover in a workshop or a how-to book. Your voice isn't something you find, it's something you are. Stripped of all the pretense and protective coloring, the only advice that matters is this: pay attention to everything. To the way your boss talks to his secretary, to the sound your neighbor makes when she cries through the thin walls, to the specific color of despair in a bus station at 3 a.m. Most people sleepwalk through their lives. Your job as a writer, hell, your job as a human being is to stay awake. I wrote in that unsent letter about the loneliness of the writing life, how it requires you to spend most of your time alone with your thoughts, which is terrifying for people who've spent their whole lives running from themselves. I wrote about the financial insecurity, the way society treats artists as expendable luxuries, the constant pressure to justify your existence. Fourth, embrace your damage. Don't try to heal from it. Don't try to overcome it. Don't let anyone convince you it's something to be ashamed of. Your damage is your material, your fuel, your unique perspective on the world. Without it, you're just another middle-class person with opinions about the weather. This goes against everything the self-help industry preaches, but it's true. Your wounds are your strengths. Your flaws are your features. Your madness is your method. The stuff that makes you unemployable in the straight world, your inability to accept bullshit, your compulsion to tell uncomfortable truths, your refusal to play nice. These are exactly the qualities that can make you a good writer. The letter I never sent to that young writer contained all of this and more warnings about the way success can be just as destructive as failure. Advice about learning to live on very little money. Suggestions for finding time to write when you're working. Shit jobs to survive. I wrote about the importance of reading everything, especially the writers who make you jealous, and about the danger of workshops that turn original voices into factory-produced copies. I told him about the dark nights when you question everything, when the work feels pointless and the whole enterprise seems like an elaborate form of self-torture. I told him about the moments of breakthrough when everything clicks and you remember why you started doing this in the first place. I told him that both the despair and the euphoria are temporary and that the real work happens in the spaces between them, but I didn't send the letter because I knew he wouldn't listen. Young writers never do. They have to learn these lessons the hard way, through years of rejection and disappointment and slowly dawning understanding that this life they've chosen is going to hurt more than they thought possible. Maybe that's the point. Maybe the beautiful madness isn't something you can teach, it's something you have to earn. One mistake at a time, until you've been broken down enough to be built back up into something real. The letter sits in my desk drawer, yellowed now. A reminder of all the things I wanted to say to my younger self, but couldn't. Because some wisdom can only come from lived experience, and some truths can only be learned through suffering. But maybe, if you're listening to this, you can save yourself a little time and pain by remembering the goal isn't to be a successful writer. The goal is to be an honest one. Everything else is just noise. Artifact, my last typewriter, an IBM Selectric that clicked and hummed through my final years. This machine carried my last words, my final attempts to make sense of a life that never quite made sense, but was somehow worth living anyway. So, here we are, at the end of another night, another bottle, another attempt to explain the unexplainable. You've listened to an old drunk ramble about beautiful madness and authentic living, and all the other things that matter when you're too close to death to lie about what life really is. Maybe you came here looking for answers, for some secret formula that would make your own madness more bearable. If so, I'm sorry to disappoint you. I don't have answers, I just have experience. And experience teaches you that the questions are more interesting than the answers anyway. What I can tell you is this: you're going to die. Probably sooner than you think. Certainly sooner than you're prepared for. That sounds morbid, but it's actually the most liberating truth you'll ever hear. Once you really accept that death is inevitable, you stop wasting time on things that don't matter and start focusing on the things that do. The beautiful madness isn't about being crazy, it's about being awake in a world of sleepwalkers, honest in a world of liars, authentic in a world of performers. It's about refusing to pretend that the emperor has clothes when you can clearly see his naked ass. That last typewriter saw me through my final productive years, when my body was falling apart, but my mind was still sharp enough to cut through the bullshit and get to the heart of things. The IBM Selectric was a beautiful machine, precise, reliable, fast enough to keep up with the flood of words that poured out of me during those last years. When I knew time was running short, I wrote some of my best work on that machine, not because I was getting better as a writer. I'd been doing this too long to have any illusions about improvement, but because I was getting more honest. When you know you're dying, really dying, not just eventually dying like everyone else, it becomes impossible to waste words on anything that isn't essential. Most people will tell you to be reasonable, to compromise, to find a middle ground between your dreams and reality. Fuck that. The middle ground is where dreams go to die. Take the unreasonable position. Make the uncomfortable choice. Be the person who refuses to settle for safe mediocrity. You'll pay for it. They'll call you difficult, unstable, unemployable. They'll exclude you from their dinner parties and their social circles and their comfortable little worlds. Let them. You don't want to be part of anything that requires you to pretend to be someone you're not. I think about all the writers who played it safe, who wrote what they thought people wanted to read instead of what they needed to say. Their books are forgotten now, gathering dust in used bookstores. While the dangerous books, the ones that made people uncomfortable, that challenged assumptions, that refused to be polite, those books are still finding new readers, still causing trouble, still doing their work. The last typewriter represents something important, the end of an era. Maybe, but also the continuity of the struggle. Other people will sit at other typewriters, laptops, whatever comes next, and they'll try to make sense of their own beautiful madness. The tools change, but the need to create meaning from chaos remains constant. Near the end, when my hands were too shaky to type properly and my eyes too weak to see the keys clearly, I'd still sit at that machine for a few minutes each day, just listening to the hum of the motor, feeling the weight of the keys under my fingers. It was a ritual, a way of staying connected to the work that had defined my life for so many years. If my work has done anything useful, I hope it's shown you that it's possible to live without apology, to create something valuable from the wreckage of an imperfect life, to find beauty in places where other people see only ugliness. I wrote about drunks and losers, whores and gamblers, people who lived on the margins of society and found ways to maintain their dignity despite everything the world threw at them. I wrote about the post office and the racetrack, about failed relationships and small apartments and the 1,000 daily humiliations that make up most people's lives. But underneath all of that, the drinking and the fighting and the general chaos, there was always love. Love for the human struggle. Love for the people who refuse to give up, even when giving up would be the sensible thing to do. Love for the beautiful madness that keeps us going when logic says we should quit. The sun's coming up now. Time for this old bastard to get some sleep. But before I go, let me leave you with this. Whatever you do, wherever you go, however you choose to live your life, do it fully, do it honestly, do it like you mean it. The world has enough people going through the motions. What it needs is more beautiful madmen who refuse to accept that this is all there is, who keep pushing against the boundaries, who keep asking the uncomfortable questions. Don't let them tame you. Don't let them convince you that your wildness is something to be ashamed of. Don't let them turn you into another cog in their machine, another voice in their chorus of conformity. Stay mad, stay beautiful, stay awake, and remember something. The most revolutionary act is simply telling the truth. The typewriter is silent now, but the words remain. That's the only immortality any of us can hope for, that something we said or wrote or did will outlive us, will find its way to someone who needs it, will make them feel less alone in the dark. If these words do that for you, then my beautiful madness has served its purpose. If they don't, well, at least I was honest about it. That's all any of us can do. Be honest about our experience, authentic about our pain, truthful about our joy. The rest is just noise, just the sound of a world trying to convince itself that the lies are more comfortable than the truth. But we know better, don't we? We beautiful madmen know that the truth, however uncomfortable, is the only thing worth living for. Now, go out there and live it.